12 in a series of Indian Education for All workshops. We're really happy that you're here with us today. We have some very special speakers. We'd also like to have some interaction with you. And so I'd like to just make a few announcements to get us started, and then I'll introduce our first speaker here. So these Indian Education for All events have been sponsored by different groups in the past. This series is available because of a wonderful grant from the Provost's office. We've also had support continually from the Native American Studies Department, from the Department of Education, the Diversity Awareness Office, the Office of Public Instruction, the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed, and also here on campus, the Teaching and Learning Committee. So we're very happy that you can be here. We know that we have a time block, 1 to 4, set for today, and all of you have obligations, and some of you will be coming and going. There are treats over here to the side. They do let us eat in the procrastinator theater and drink. So please feel free to get up and get some treats if you would like. There are restrooms for those of you that aren't familiar with the procrastinator theater or the sub, just outside this door here and to the left. And so we're really glad you're here, and please feel free to get up. And when we do have time for questions and answers, we really hope that you will also participate. Today we have an agenda where we're looking at Indian Education for All in higher ed and in Indian country. We have our first speaker, Dr. Henrietta Mann. Brandy Foster from the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed is also going to share it. And then we have a panel, which is a surprise even to me at this point. And Dr. Wayne Stein will lead a discussion about Indian Education for All in Indian country, and we have some tribal college presidents that are going to be here with us. So I am so happy that Dr. Mann is here. And this came about in May when we were driving back from Fort Peck. We were there for Dr. Florence Garcia's, one of our MSU alums, was inaugurated as the college president of Fort Peck Community College, and we were there. And Henry had a flight to Billings, and it must have been a really scary flight because she offered and came with me in the car to drive back instead of getting on her flight. And the first thing I did was hand her the sheet that I had printed off that had directions. And I said, okay, you're going to have to be the copilote. If you're going to come with me, you have a job. And so she starts reading it, and the first thing she said is, pull out of 1675 Nelson Road and turn right. And I said, no, that's my house. You have to look at the directions and read them backwards. And she, of course, said, how did you ever get here? So, anyway, it was a very enjoyable ride. And the whole trip down, we talked about all the different initiatives. And Henrietta, of course, has been a leader in Indian education her whole career. And this is just an incredible blessing, and we're so grateful that she's here to share with you today. So Dr. Henrietta Mann is a Cheyenne enrolled with the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes, and she's the founding president of the Cheyenne Arapaho Tribal College, and that's in Weatherford, Oklahoma. Dr. Mann was the first individual to occupy the endowed chair in Native American Studies here at MSU, and she also has a professor emeritus status, and she continues to serve as the special assistant to the president with President Gamble and now with President Carjuzaa. For the greater part of 28 years, she was employed at the University of Montana, Missoula. No booze, please.
Sorry.
Where she was direct professor of Native American Studies. She also has taught at the University of California in Berkeley, the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University, and Haskell Indian Nations University, located in Lawrence, Kansas. In addition, Dr. Mann has served as the director of the Office of Indian Education Programs, deputy to the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. She's also was the national coordinator of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act Coalition for the Association on American Indian Affairs. In 1991, Rolling Stone magazine named Dr. Mann as one of the 10 leading professors in the nation. She was one of 7 recipients of the State of Montana Governor's Humanities Award in 2001. She joined Chairman Earl Oldperson of the Blackfeet Nation in delivering the Montana Tribal Nations Address to the joint session of the Senate and House of the Montana 57th Legislative Assembly in February 2001. In 2008, she received the Lifetime Achievements Award from the National
Indian Education Association. The University of New Mexico honored her with the 2008 Bernard S. Rohde Award for her leadership, vision, and inspirational guidance in Native American education. She's published a book, Cheyenne and Arapaho Education, from 1871 to 1982, and she has been an interviewee and consultant for several television and movie productions, which included The White Man's Image, How the West Was Lost, Paha Sapa, Struggle for the Black Hills, The West, and Last of the Dogmen. Dr. Mann has lectured throughout the United States, including Hawaii, Mexico, Canada, Germany, Italy, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And that's the short mini bio. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Mann.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jioanna. I don't know if you can hear me. All of these mics, it almost makes me feel like I'm a celebrity, a political one, with all of these microphones in front, and you never know which one you're supposed to be speaking into, or whether you should be speaking at all. I am so pleased to be back here on the campus of Montana State University. I have been gone for several years, and I really have had to think twice, 3 times, 4 times about what I'm doing in Oklahoma. Well, first of all, I am a native Oklahoma, as Jioanna has said, and there's sometimes challenges put before you that you really have to be mindful of and to accept. Responsibilities. When we talk about life, there's a lot of responsibilities. You have responsibilities as students, as faculty, as administrators, and I'd like to welcome one of the new deans to our campus. And before I go any further, as protocol demands, I would like to recognize one of our members of the Board of Regents, Major Robinson of the Northern Cheyenne Nation. I'm very proud of him, just as I am each one of you. I like to begin by expressing gratitude for life. I mean, I don't know what many of you felt like yesterday when that wind suddenly started blowing and the snow came and it looked like we could all be blown to the North Pole and live among the polar bears that are facing problems right now. And I sat at the motel looking out the window at it because it was just absolutely beautiful for me. Far different from where I am in Oklahoma. Still very warm. I think the temperature yesterday, I was told, was about 83 degrees. And here I am. And next week, I'll be going to Alaska. Even further. So this is sort of acclimating me for what I face in that state to the north. Life. That's life. Life is so precious. Life is to be cherished. If we stop and think, can you imagine if we didn't have the ability to see, to hear, to touch, to smell, and to taste? I think we too often take such wonderful blessings and such miracles for granted. So we should be very thankful for these abilities. I am, and I try to be, and every morning when I wake to see another day, I am blessed. And I thank Mahia for letting me see another day. And I was so thankful this morning getting to see the mountains of Montana and to try to walk in the snow. and to be here. And I was very, very anxious and eager to see every one of you. It looks as if my friend is not flying his plane somewhere to the Aura yet. And thank you for being here, Rob. A very fine supporter, he and his wife, of Native American Studies. Rob Buckles. He certainly is one of those that gives back to the university, and we appreciate that. We appreciate their generosity. Otherwise, he could be sitting on a plane, flying to places that I've never seen, but would love to. But he's here instead with his wonderful wife. And I could see them, and I could see all of you. I can't hear too well anymore. But I heard that wind blowing yesterday. And it was blowing away, for me, a lot of things maybe that are not good. And sending them to different parts of this earth. So very much for which we should each be thankful. I would also acknowledge that we need to always show our appreciation and our gratitude for the beloved spirits of this place, beautiful. This place that was home first to our ancestors, the indigenous peoples of this state we now call Montana, that we now share with others who came to visit. Now that I'm in Oklahoma, there is this woman on campus that is always proud of the fact that she's ninth generation pioneer, or sooner, whichever one you're going to call it. I almost feel diminished by that. I say, stop and look at the generations that my ancestors were here and think how they got here. How many of them were forced, literally, and herded to their homelands. And I want to acknowledge the spirits of this place. And I think that is something that we can all be very proud of, to be sharing this wonderful land. When I come to Montana, my son always says, would you get me some stickers? So I already went. He turns 52 tomorrow, my son. And so I got him all kinds of stickers, and one was the last best place. I guess it is. And we have to always acknowledge the spirits that made it possible for us to live in this place. Beautiful. I would like to express my gratitude for this day, this beautiful day. I'd like to express gratitude to this earth, for the sun that's up there, for the winds, for the river, and for the hearts, yours and mine, vibrant with life. There. Good hearts. Happy hearts. I think one of the stickers was, Montana is my happy place. Well, our hearts should be very happy for all of these blessings that we have been given. Precious gifts. I want to thank you for being who you are. My two nephews sitting over here, Walter. And it was Wayne that gave me the opportunity to leave the University of Montana and to come here to be the first person to fill the Katz endowed chair. And of course, we know that in terms of the academic ladder, that is really the ultimate. And not that I was looking at that, I thought, I'd like to go to that place. They have such fine support from their administration. They have so much that at the time we lacked at the other school. So I came here. And I thank them for this opportunity. One of the best things that someone has ever done for me. Thank you, two doctors over there. Thank you for being you and for embracing me again and welcoming me back to this place that I think about as I face one of the biggest challenges in my life, which is building a tribal college. And in building that tribal college, I too have to acknowledge the generations upon generations of grandparents who gave me life, who gave you life. For without them, the contemporary generations would be devoid of a culture identity and a purpose. We're accountable to our ancestors. We're also accountable to the children who have yet to come to walk on this earth. And it is for them that we sit about the important task and the challenge of building a college for the Cheyenne and the Arapaho people. I have accompanying me today my IR Administrative and Admissions Officer, Gail Wilcox. I try to convince her that she should really think of moving here to Montana. But she is completing a certificate, a graduate certificate online offered through the Native American Studies program here at Montana State University. And I thought, we've got to tap into that expertise. And so this semester she's teaching our Introduction to Native American Studies course. I think she's having fun. But she is also incorporating it into it, all of the kinds of knowledge and the teachings that she learned in that certificate program offered here. I think that we really need to be proud of having one of the few online courses, if not the only graduate online course in the country. It speaks well for commitment to higher education here. And whether I'm here in Montana, whether I am in Oklahoma, I share the concern of everyone on our reservations. And that is when a tribal elder dies, essential knowledge of the world is lost forever. It's lost to us. We are very diminished. And it's lost forever since it lives only in the mind of that individual. Can you imagine what we have lost? The knowledge that has helped us to survive generations upon generations. And when an elder dies, tragically, the basis of traditional knowledge is eroded, never to be regained. And cultures are diminished beyond imagination. Very tragic, very sad. But today, as a result of, and I call Jioanna by her last name, but I don't think I know how to pronounce it. So she's just Dr. Jioanna, I guess, in this case. Without her gathering us here at this very special moment in time, and we would not have the opportunity to celebrate and honor the first peoples of this land, the culture bearers who were first to live in this great nation. And so from this center of time and place, I believe we need to imagine the past, all that has been, but also think of how it has influenced today and all that you walk toward. The influence, what you carry, what is going to be carried from here, from the classrooms, from our communities, to walk into tomorrow. Many tomorrows, I hope, for you. But there is so much about which we have to be cognizant and what we have to incorporate into our classroom content. What about this earth? What is happening here? What about something called climate change? What about something that we have to face that is called global warming? We Cheyennes know that we were at one time fortunate to have an individual by the name of Sweet Medicine come to us and teach us our way of life. And also to make certain predictions about today. And one of them, he said, was the earth will burn. Maybe that's what's happening today. And if that's what it is, that needs to be taught to our children. They need to know what their future is going to be like in terms of projections. I wished it weren't. But we are always so cognizant of the kind of knowledge that we have been given. I mean, we can waterproof certain items. We can weatherproof certain clothing. I like to think that we really need to be proactive about climate proofing. The kind of knowledge of wisdom for our children. I don't think we really have much time. And I know that my grandfather always emphasized the fact that I should be one of those individuals that really thinks about, like you, leaving this earth and this place a much better than when I came to walk here. Leaving it better for our children. Teaching them about life, reality of life, not just constant abstractions. But to teach them well. To teach them with honesty and cultural integrity. They need to feel the amazing power of being alive, just as you need to too. In our creation story as Cheyenne people, when Mahil, the Great One, created the four sacred beings who were to watch the entire act of creation and who still sit in the four directions of the universe protecting us. They were created and they felt this power within them. The same kind of power that we each have. A great deal of power within. And there is that power. So you need to recognize the power with which you are filled. And you need to always envision the infinite, miraculous possibilities, of which there are many. And we need to remember, in looking back to yesterday, in the time of long ago, only the reddish brown people lived on this land, and their cultures evolved from this earth. that they honored as their spiritual mother. Still do. They are the keeper people of earth and have a cultural imperative to maintain her well-being. If those that came to live with us here in this nation would but listen, we have great responsibility. And we keep this earth alive, as one of our late tribal elders has said, keep this earth alive through our ceremonies. We haven't given them up. And we never will. So our promise is a sweet medicine. It was a promise of responsibility that they said we would carry. And by virtue of having lived here the longest as the reddish-brown people of this land, I like to think that we're the grandparent generation. We are the grandparent generation of this land, of this earth. And I hope we teach wisely. But we are only one set of keepers. There are three others. And one stops and looks at how we view life as a circle divided into quarters with different color associations and different directional associations, and in each of those quadrants a different color of people. The white, the red, the yellow, and the black people. We each have our responsibilities for keeping things such as the earth, the water, the air, and fire. And as the grandparent generation of this land and being responsible for this earth, American Indians are earthborn. They are earth. We come from the earth. They live out their lives on earth, and ultimately they return to the earth. We are not only earthborn, we are earthbound. And I have read the book by David Suzuki that talks about this world and talks about Earth, and he talks about us, and he says that quite simply, we're earthenware, made from the clay of this land. Earthenware. But more importantly, we have responsibility to this earth because it's our altar. It's a place from which our ceremonial people, our spiritual keepers, send their prayers out to the universe. And of course, we need to continue to recognize that the earth is a mother, a feminine being. I think science has finally come to that conclusion. And she is a loving spirit. And she has nurtured life continuously and inexhaustibly since the beginning. And her first children from here were a happy, self-reliant people at the sunrise of creation as they began their earth journey. We've journeyed from many places. We've journeyed around. We're still on a journey. All of us now collectively, where are we journeying to? Where are we going? Wherever it is, we better carry our teachings with us. Teachings not formalized and put into textbooks, and I wish they were, but teachings that you learn through apprenticeships, by experience in them in ceremony, by sitting at the feet of your elders and learning from the stories. That's only one part of learning, a half of learning. The other half is to come to places like Montana State University and acquire a whole different system of education, be educated in that way. I think we need to, as we're taking this journey from the past to today, recognize that American Indians, the first peoples of this land that we call Kamawustania, meaning the natural, ordinary, simple people of this land. Kamawustania, all indigenous peoples, all the tribes, 562, 65 of them, were the Kamawustania, the ordinary, natural, simple people of the land. And we need to recognize that these Kamawustania established the first educational systems in this country. Yeah. I used to do a lot of research and even writing before I came here, and I wrote an article on Indian education, and I think it was included in a book edited by Tom Thompson from the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. And my quotation started out, my book started out with something like, education did not come to this country on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. It was here. And Dick Little Bear always loves to quote me in that regard, so I've got one quotation floating around out in the world of Indian education. Dr. Richard Little Bear, president of Chief Dull Knife College, a member of the Council of Elders for Montana State University, a wonderful linguist, a man who is a treasure to all of us in terms of his linguistic knowledge. But ours were the first educational systems, and in them we practiced lifelong learning, all of these kinds of terms that are used in education courses. And we too educated for the community or for the nation, which our tribal colleges and universities still do today. Educate for the community or nation. And of course, culture and language constituted the cores of their curricula, which helped to create strong identities and prepare their students for life. Skillful, knowledgeable individuals. We learned how to be very competent Blackfeet, Crow, Cree, Salish, Kootenai, on and on. We spoke our tribal languages fluently. We kept our tribal histories orally, verbally, in our hearts and in our minds, both places. And that has led in Scott Momaday, who won the 1969 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and who last year, I believe, was Poet Laureate of Oklahoma, to make the statement, because of our oral traditions as a peoples, we are always but one generation removed from extinction. Yes. And so we still keep our tribal histories orally. We are this country's first historians. We established our first schools. We have the first teachers. Our students were the first students. First in many ways, and still are in my estimation. And as Native peoples, we have always believed in education and its ability to empower. And I want to thank those that are committed to continuing to empower our younger generations. Thank you. Because for the Kamawastania, education is a life process that has always, that we have always valued and honored. And it disheartens me to think sometimes that we are that invisible minority that oftentimes, too many times, excluded from the pages of history books, from the makeup of society, from communities, from schools and universities. In looking at our indigenous systems, we had traditional innovative teaching strategies that can be called today the open classroom or the open school. Children did not have any vacation. We didn't have summer vacations. Maybe they did if they had to go to ceremony, but that was still a continuing process. And their schools, for us as Plains Indians, were often conducted as they moved from one part of the plains to the other. Or in a teepee that was pitched in a far different place from where it had stood the day or two before. We were familiar with something called team teaching, because not everyone knew how to make a perfect arrow. Not everyone knew how to tan soft and white buckskin. Not everyone knew how to make a teepee and understand the concepts of geometry. Not everyone knew how to go out and kill a bison to bring back to the encampment to feed the people for another day. And so they collaborated in team teaching. They excelled at individualized instruction, one-on-one. And their curriculum consisted of philosophy, history, language, geography, biology and sciences, math and geometry, and bachelor survival courses too. The men had to learn how to take care of themselves and sew their moccasins if they went out on a hunt or an expedition of some kind. They had to know how to cook for themselves. And of course, there's always home economics. Because for us, the home is very important. It is the most sacred, the happiest, the most secure of all places on earth. And the woman owned that home. And she was familiar with what we might call home economics. We believed in something called the concept of interdependence. We knew that everything in this world was related to every other thing, because we're made up of the same four basic elements. Water. We're about, 72% water? My gosh, we're more water. You're more water. You're more water than I am. As an older person, as an elder, I understand that my water content has probably dropped to about 65%. Literally trying that. Yeah. So Gail tries very hard to keep me hydrated. Yeah, but you're 72% water. And by virtue of the fact that you're water, you're related to that falls from the skies, that stands in the oceans, that flows in underground aquifers, rivers, streams, that comes in different forms like ice or fog or mist. Water. And your water. Doesn't that make for some kind of relationship and kinship? And the same goes for earth. You know, your earth. Just like we're earthenware. You are too. And what about air? Oh my goodness. We couldn't live without air. Not for very long. What, maybe 5 minutes? Probably me 2 minutes. I don't know. Not very long. But I don't want you to go and test how long you can do that by jumping in a swimming pool. Oh, at least give yourself time to come up. But air. Air is vital to life. And air is also connected to breathing, and breath is connected to life. But breath is also connected to speaking, to song, one of the great cycles of life. Without air, and that pressure from our lungs vibrating the vocal cords, there would be no sound or language. There would be no song. There would be no verbal prayer. We would live in a world devoid of sound and would live without air. Devoid of sound. And there is air within you, because if you didn't have air in those lungs, they would be collapsing about right now. So we're all related. And our elders knew that. They knew that we lived in this interdependent world, and that's what they taught. Sophisticated philosophy that they knew by observing year after year after year throughout time. So they say we live in a relational world, an interdependent world in which we live in oceans of relations. We're water, we're earth, we're air, we're fire, so is everything else. And so we're related. But not just as humans. We're related to everything else. The four-leggeds, those that fly, those that crawl, those that stand rooted in the earth. There are relations. And isn't it very important, if we're in this concept of relations, related to them, that we take care of life? That we become better stewards of this land? We don't have any other place to live. Planet Earth is our only home. So I think it behooves us to take care of it and to teach our children to take care of it too. And this interdependent world in which we live is also characterized by mutuality and reciprocity. So we had our pre-contact kind of education, and then came something called compulsory education in a non-Indian sense, because sweet medicine had also told us that one day in the future we would meet a light-skinned, fair-haired people toward the sunrise where the big rivers flow. The big river is the Mississippi River, and that we would meet them there, and they would change our world. And we met them as Cheyenne people about the year of 1680 for the first time. And there was something like manifest destiny or cultural imperialism, or we had to settle this land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It had to be settled. And the tragic part is in that whole manifestation of destiny, there was no attention paid to those that had lived there in the interior of the continent or even on the edges of the continent, because those that came to live with us believed they had a divine right, that this land was given to them by their God, and they were to inhabit it. When we were mentioned as obstacles to progress. And we lived with the land, and so how was this land going to be transferred? Initially, it was done through treaties. History books usually say 400. Senator Daniel Inouye says 800. And about 400 of them lie in the archives someplace just gathering dust. But about 371 of them were ratified by the new United States Senate. Okay, it's new. By the Senate. That body of our government that still ratifies treaties. And there's a treaty clause in the Constitution of this United States that the treaties are the supreme law of the land. It does not exclude Indian treaties. So we have these treaties, about 371 of them that are ratified, 400 estimate, 400 that lie in archives. And in over 100 of those treaties was an educational provision, which required children that were male and female between the ages of 6 and 16 to attend school. And the government promised to provide one schoolhouse for every 30 children and one teacher to be provided for every schoolhouse. And that this provision was to be in effect for no less than 20 years. Usually, that was the content. There was no date of termination. So it's still in effect. Not being fulfilled, but, and right now, with the kinds of regulations being set down by the Department of Education governing financial aid, I think we are once more having been subjected to financial aid termination for our students who rely so much upon federal assistance and Pell Grants. And when this happened and we were told that we were to send our children to these schools, this was really the fulfillment of one of the points of the farewell prophecy that Sweet Medicine had told the Cheyennes in the far distant past. That these people that came to live with us would ask for our children, and we had to say no. We were supposed to say no. And we were supposed to say no because those that they took to educate would not have a very strong cultural sense of identity. They would not know who they were. They would not learn their histories. They would not know their languages. They would not know what it is to be the children of the indigenous peoples of this land. And it is that fact, to me, that makes Indian education for all in the state of Montana so unique and so important. That this state is in the forefront of Indian education by that piece of legislation. And the reason that we are gathered here today. Indian education for all. Not just for Indian children, but for the non-Indian children that we too have a responsibility to teach. That we worry about living together as good neighbors. Respecting each other's ways of life. Recognizing their kinship and relationship to one another. But Sweet Medicine said we were to avoid contact with these people that we would call, which has two meanings in the Cheyenne language, spider and the Anglo people. We were to avoid them because they would bring us misfortune and hardship. They would bring diseases, illness, loss, and grief. And we know that there was a depopulation that occurred from point of contact to when we were included in the first federal census. Sorry, you have to leave. I think in the adjusted population figures of Russell Thornton, he estimates that there were 5.65 million indigenous peoples here in the contiguous 48 states at time of contact. 1492. By 1890, the first time that we were all included in the federal census. Some have been included in the census before, but it had excluded reservations. Our population was down to 250,000. Look at that population decrease. 250,000 to 5.65 million. And by the way, you can look at some of these statistics through in the book written by my nephew, Dr. Walter Fleming, An Idiot's Guide to Native American History. I reviewed that, by the way. I have my little statement on the cover of this book. It's my claim to fame. Thank you. So it's a good resource. And so we talked about these diseases that would come to us. Well, some of the diseases carried by those that came to live with us we had never encountered before. Even there were simple childhood diseases. Measles, smallpox, whooping cough devastated us by the thousands. Obviously by the millions. We were devastated by, natural deaths, military conflict and that, but diseases. And I am sad whenever I stop and look and think about our contemporary condition today as and we have to worry so much about the new kinds of diseases, particularly diabetes and heart problems. And the mental health that unfortunately has resulted in too many suicides among our young people. I think of sweet medicine's prophecy. And of course, he talked about the loss of land that we would encounter and the kind of cultural contamination and disorientation that has occurred, brought about by government, church, and educational systems working together, with education used as a tool of assimilation or indoctrination. And so, however, always looking at tomorrow with some sense of hope, sweet medicine said that we would endure as a people as long as we kept our sacred tribal objects in that, so long as we remembered him and his teachings. Education is vitally important. Teaching our teachings, our own tribal teachings. And sweet medicine exerted a very positive power upon the people with this power to see into the future. And so, Euro-Americans imported their own form of education, made it parts of treaties, so we had to listen. And they instituted such things as English-only boarding schools, on reservations, off reservations that instituted the outing system, which was a way of immersing Indian students in a family setting with individuals who were committed to the white Protestant work ethic. WASPs. And in these schools, those that work there subscribe to the idea that if you want to change a people, brought about by the founder of off-reservation boarding schools, Richard Henry Pratt, if you want to change a people, you begin with their children. And they did. Which is why today, when we talk about saving our language and revitalizing them and maintaining them, we're beginning with our children too. And that's where it's going to really help. And we teach our languages at the Tribal College to our students, but we really need to be more cognizant of teaching our little children to begin with them. And so the first 300 years of Indian education have been called the Great Experiment. It doesn't really feel good to be a part of that great experiment and to be the ones being experimented upon. So I think we've stopped that. And it was called to the nation's attention by something called the Merriam Report, which was named after the, I guess, principal investigator, as we would call him, Lewis Merriam, in his book, The Problem of Indian Administration. And it was followed by the 1969, and the Merriam Report was in 1928, but in 1969 we had the Kennedy Report on Indian Education, a national tragedy, a national challenge. Virtually the same kind of findings, virtually the same kinds of recommendations. And what the Kennedy Report, however, resulted in some action, and it brought about what we might call self-determination in education and for operating our programs. Self-determination. And this, I guess, the sense of self-determination really ushered in the tribal college movement, which we began in 1968 with the establishment of the Navajo Community College called Dene College today. And today there are, if one looks at the statistics for the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, there are 33 regular members, tribal colleges and universities, 4 associate members, and 2 of them are the College of the Muskogee Nation and the College of the Comanche Nation in Oklahoma, and 1 international member college. About 38. Big job ahead of them. And we're very fortunate in the state of Montana to have a tribal college and university on each of the 7 reservations. Wonderful again. I mean, when we talk about Indian education for all, then I could go clear back and talk about the Constitution, the new Constitution of the state of Montana when I first moved here in 1972, and the Indian Studies law then. I've seen a great deal of change here in this state. I lived here for some 37 years before venturing away. And tribal colleges and universities doing good work. And when I have shared what I've shared with you, I guess, is just a long roundabout history of Indian education. But it's also the story of wonderful institutions like tribal colleges and universities. It's really a story of tenacity and commitment to higher education by those 38, let's say 40 nations in the country. That's not very many. If there are about 562 or so nations, First Nations in this country, and only about 40 of them have tribal colleges. But it's our way of demonstrating our sovereign rights and seeing to the higher education of our students or tribal citizens. And it is a way to honor and to maintain the traditional knowledge of our grandparents. Wonderful institutions. But only about 40 of them in round numbers. And I am about trying to build one. And our biggest challenge and that we look at is that we rely upon funding solely from our tribe for now. Can't be any other way. There's no money for us as developing institutions. So for 4 years, maybe 5 years, I've been in Oklahoma, brick by brick, being a bricklayer, brick by brick, building that little college, a small college, but so important to our tribes. For us, education is the promise of tomorrow. And these tribal colleges and universities are the academic bridge of continuity between our past and our future. To bring my presentation to a close, I would like to say that the story I have told you, I think, is one of tenacity, one of tragedy, one of assimilation, one of hope. But we survived the cultural trauma imposed by the off-reservation boarding school experiences and even, I would say, the public school experience. And we are tenaciously holding on to our languages, some of which are being revived by immersion schools, pattern on those immersion schools in Hawaii and New Zealand. The kind of immersion school that exists on the Blackfeet Reservation, Darrell kept school, and the other kind of initiatives within the state. And today, while we number around 2.5 million only, we're back up, it is still an incredibly exciting time to be alive as a people of continuing cultural strength who have always believed and still believed in education. So that's this very brief history. It's my story for you today. And I thank you for listening to an old woman who has labored long in the trenches of Indian education, nearly half my lifetime, and I'm 78 years old. Not time for me to go into retirement. It's still time for me to stand beside Jioanna and say, I'll try. I want to thank you today. Be careful when you walk. Remember you're made of water and of earth and air and fire, and that makes you related to everything in this beautiful planet Earth. Thank you very much. Sure. Oh, no.
Okay? All right.
Oh, well, maybe I better sit here.
Thank Indian education for reminding us that we're all related and that we're all connected and that we have hope for what's going to come forward. We have Brandy Foster is going to speak next, and then we'll have an official break if you don't want to get up now and get something. But I'll spend a couple of minutes here to introduce Brandy. And before Brandy took the position of Director of American Indian and Minority Student Achievement at the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education here in Montana, we had Ellen Swaney in that position for 20 years. When she retired, we had an interim person who only lasted a few months. When she left that position, those in Helena called MSU and asked Jim Burns and I who we could recommend. And we thought and shared, we really don't dislike anybody enough for that position. So, very tough shoes to fill, and also really hard work to do with a lot of people in office that necessarily weren't supportive of our efforts in higher ed for Indian education for all and for Indian student achievement. I am so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with Brandy. They picked the right person. I don't know where she came from because we didn't know that she would be interested in this position, but there's no question she's the best person to be leading us in higher ed. For the first time, we have money in higher education, and that's all due to Brandy's efforts. We actually have support for teachers that are part of the certificate program that are taking a course in Indian Education for All, actually a course in culturally responsive pedagogy, looking at Indian Education for All as the model that it is, that's been recognized worldwide. And Brandy has brought us hope. Brandy Foster is currently the Director of American Indian and Minority Achievement for the Montana University System in the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed. She's worked in higher ed for the last 17 years, specifically focusing on access, student engagement, program assessment, and multicultural and health education. Brandy earned her bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Montana, her master's degree in anthropology at Iowa State University, and she's currently working on her doctoral degree in anthropology at U of M. Her current research is examining the impact of Native American Studies courses on the cultural identity of students. Brandy also completed a one-year fellowship at Harvard University in higher ed administration in 2001 and has served as Director of Retention and Advising, Grant Administration, and Academic Dean at a variety of campuses in the Northwest. As a first-generation college student herself, she understands the struggles of transitioning to higher education and has dedicated her professional career to making the process easier for others. Recently, we hosted the NACADA Advising Conference here a couple weeks ago on campus, and Brandy was the keynote speaker. I was really moved by her story, and I'm so happy today she's going to share with you what's happening in higher education as far as Indian Education for All goes. So welcome, Brandy Foster, please.
Thank you very much. I wondered who you were talking about for a second, really. But I guess that's me. And I'm so pleased to be up here with Dr. Mann. I'll be on my best behavior, I promise. So, well, you earned that right. You earned that right. So, as Jioanna said, I'm the Director of American Indian and Minority Achievement for the state of Montana for the university system. And the way it works, if you don't know, the Montana University System is made up of 14 campuses here in Montana, and that's all of our public education campuses. It does not include the tribal colleges, and it does not include private schools such as Carroll or Rocky Mountain. And so we have the University of Montana side, we have the Montana State University side, and we have our community colleges. And I work in the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed, who, along with the Board of Regents, we determine, in some ways in consultation with the campuses, the pathway for education in Montana. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Indian Education for All when it comes to higher ed. So in 1972, the Montana State Constitution added language that you heard Dr. Mann speak of that said that the state actually recognizes the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians of our state and is committed to the educational goals to the preservation of their cultural integrity. This is a very important thing in the history of our state to understand that this is constitutional. So this is a big deal. And as you may have heard before, and you will hear again, we're one of the few states that actually have this type of language. And what it means is that people recognized way long ago, 40 years ago, back in 1972, that we had an obligation to all people of the state of Montana. So Indian Education for All is a law that came about, and you have to fast forward about 30 years from 1972, where the constitutional language was changed, to where the law actually became in place. And then you have to wait about another 8 years before funding was put behind it. But Indian Education for All has some specific components that you should know as people who are being educated in the state of Montana, and for those of you who are teaching students. It says essentially that every Montanan, whether Indian or non-Indian, be encouraged to learn about the distinct and unique heritage of American Indians in a culturally responsive manner. So this is for all students, and that's important to recognize that. Every educational agency, that means public education, that means early childhood ed, K-12, as well as higher education, and all educational personnel will work cooperatively with tribes to include information specific to the cultural heritage and contemporary contributions of American Indians. All school personnel should have understanding and awareness of Indian tribes to help them relate effectively with Indian students and parents, and to gain an understanding of and appreciation for the American Indian people. So we need to make sure in Montana that our school personnel, whether it's Head Start, K-12, or higher education, have training. And if you're in the teacher ed program here at MSU Bozeman, you know that you have courses that help you identify some of this information. So the Montana University system, I wouldn't be a very good administrator, I suppose, if I didn't talk about policy. But there are some very important policies when it comes to higher education in Montana. And one of these is the American Indian Study Policy. So the Board of Regents are a governing board, and they're appointed by the governor of the state of Montana. And they work with the commissioner and the presidents of the universities and the chancellors on the campuses to govern and to determine how things work. So one of the policies that they developed was that every campus of the Montana University system has to offer a formal course of American Indian Study. That course has to be at least 3 credits. It has to be offered at least once a year, and it has to be developed with the advice and assistance of Indian people. So typically on our campuses, that's a course like Indians of Montana, Intro to Native American Studies. You all have probably taken those courses. I know some of you in here teach those courses. So that is part of the policy of the system. The other important policy is called Policy 1902, and it's the Minority Achievement Policy. And it has 3 components: that we will enroll and graduate American Indians and other minorities in proportion to their representation in the state's population. It is also expected that our minority students have comparable levels of achievement with non-minority students. It says that we'll increase the employment of American Indians and other underrepresented minorities in administration, faculty, and staff, and that we need to have equal representation to that of the relevant labor force. So as we hire the folks that work on our campuses, we want to make sure that we are recruiting from diverse backgrounds. And it also says that we need to enhance the overall curriculum by infusion of content which enhances multicultural awareness and understanding. And that's where the American Indian Study Policy comes in, but also other types of courses and our Native American Studies programs. This is important because the regents, who are essentially the folks that help determine how much money gets to campuses, how resources are allocated, they've said this is important. So if they say this is important, then the campuses have the ability to make changes, and students and faculty and staff have the obligation to hold us responsible to these policies. So the other important part that I wanted to talk about, understanding policy, is an academic plan that we have. So the university system, Indian Ed for All, as you saw earlier, is about all education in Montana. It's not just K-12, but higher ed does have an obligation. What that obligation has been specifically has been very difficult for the university system to determine, to outline, and to fund. So there is some framework in place, and there are some priorities. And I wanted to talk to you and bring these to you because, again, I think this is how you hold us accountable to these things. If you know that this is what we say is important and what we say we should be doing, then as students and faculty and staff, you have a responsibility to help us hold true to that. So the first priority, and particularly important at your campus, is teacher education. So one of the things that we've said is important, obviously, on our campuses, we train teachers, pre-service teachers. So we have a lot of folks that come to us who want to work in the public education system. And what we've said is important is that we will provide curriculum that specifically talks about Indian education for all and the 7 essential understandings. How many of you guys, just by show of hand, know what have heard of the 7 essential understandings? Okay. So Office of Public Instruction, which is our governing office for public ed, K-12, have developed with experts and our tribal communities these 7 essential understandings that talk about the things that we want everyone who's educated in Montana to understand. There are things like every tribe is a unique culture. That's one of them. It talks about sovereignty. It talks about a lot of the different components that the experts, which included Indian communities as well as educators, said we want everyone to understand. So in higher ed, our place in that is to make sure we're teaching teachers what those are. And how can you infuse those understandings into your instruction in classroom lessons? We also are in the process of talking about endorsements, a special endorsement for teaching as a minor, or just a special endorsement for Indian education for all. And there's some conversations right now with our Council of Deans to look at doing that. And essentially what that would mean is there would be a group of courses or outcomes that if you took those courses, you could be specially certification, something like that, in Indian education for all. And that would help our teachers not only be more able to get jobs in certain schools in certain areas, but also those schools and areas to look for special skills and expertise. We're not there yet, but this is something that we're working very hard towards. The second priority is that we want to provide professional development. In the university system, we do a lot of professional development for our staff, for members of our community. Specifically, we look at in-service teachers. So a lot of our K-12 teachers come to the university system to get continuing education credits. And so we want to make sure that we participate and provide opportunities such as this that allow our in-service teachers to grow and gain skill. And we also provide opportunities for our staff, faculty, administration. And I know there are people here who work for the university system who are here as a way of getting more knowledge and more information so they can serve our students. The third priority is the American Indian Study course that we talked about. And we also wanted to make sure that those 7 essential understandings are infused in those courses somehow. Now, in higher education, it gets a little tricky because there's this thing called academic freedom that faculty, if there's any faculty in the or in here, you could plug your ears for a second. But faculty, and as a former faculty and academic dean, I know this, we hold it very dear, and it's something that's very important. But we also need to make sure that it's okay to say there's some rules we have to follow. And one of the things that we're saying here is that if you want to teach these type of courses, American Indian culture, history, that in order to connect to K-12 and in order to fulfill our obligation for Indian Ed for All, we want to make sure we're being consistent in the way we're delivering that information and in the type of information we're delivering. So that's also one of the priorities. Priority 4 is general curriculum, which is that each campus has to identify opportunities to enhance the overall curriculum, which means that Indian Ed for All is not just about Native American studies, and it's not just about tribal courses or indigenous language. We need to make sure that we honor indigenous culture and knowledge in all of our disciplines and in all areas that we teach. And it's a remarkably easy thing to do. When you consult with our tribal communities and our elders and experts, it's amazing how something like a welding course can talk about the indigenous use of metals. Or we can use in our English composition courses ways to tell stories or ways to use a voice that is more indigenous. So for us in higher education, it's very important that we don't just say this is just for the College of Education, this is just for teacher ed programs, or this is just for Native American studies. This is for engineering, this is for math, this is for science, this is for medicine, this is for all of the areas in which we teach. Priority 5 revolves around research. So our campuses that do research, which is this campus here, many of our big campuses, we bring a lot of money into our system through doing research. And we like to research on tribal communities. We like to look at communities that are seen as separate. We like to look at communities that are rural, that have different types of knowledge. And so in order to do that appropriately, we have some rules about this. One of the rules is that researchers must follow the relevant tribal laws and customs in the community within which they research. That could be an institutional review board that has to go through a tribal council. That can be offering gifts or offering appropriate, asking permission in an appropriate way. We also ask that every campus has a policy that talks about indigenous intellectual property. We could talk forever about intellectual property rights, particularly when it comes to indigenous knowledge, and you may even offer courses, I don't know for sure here, in Missoula they offer courses on this, that talk about things like plant knowledge or ceremony, and how do we respect and honor that that knowledge did not come from a researcher, especially when they're publishing that information, and who owns that information. And then the institutional review board, that we want to make sure that when we're working with our Native communities that we're very intentional and careful in the ways we do research, and that we make sure we have a plan to share information with our tribal partners. So the Office of American Indian Minority Achievement sort of comes out of all of that. So there's these policies, there's these priorities, there's all this great words on paper. And one of the things that has come out of all of these great ideas is the so what factor. So how do we do that? So how do we maintain it? How do we monitor it? And I know there are people here in this office that know much more history than I, or in this room that know much more history than I do about this, about how it came about. But as Jioanna said, Ellen Sweeney helped to develop what this office is and what it means to the university system and to the state of Montana. And so what we try to do, and the we is really me and the mouse in my pocket because the office is me, but I try to work with, I know, sad, but it sounds more impressive if I say we. So what we do in the office is we work with our communities, with our campuses, and we try to make sure that those policies make sense, that they are useful, they're practical, and that they're impactful to the students. Because, and I've worked in higher education since I was 24 years old, for 17 years. And what I would say is that the student is the most important thing that happens on a college campus. And we all need to remember that. Yes. We all need to remember that. And so this office, what it tries to do is maintain the focus on the student. So all of those policies that are in place, all of those priorities that all these important people around a table decide, come back to what happens here at Bozeman every day, or up in Havre or in Dillon every day. And so this office exists because of that. So when people talk about what is higher ed doing for Indian Ed for All, I think what we're doing right now is we're trying to figure out what our obligation is, and we're trying to find a way to keep in mind the student, the history, and the communities, and then making sure that we're fulfilling that obligation. We use a lot of data too, which I won't bore you with too much, but there is one thing I wanted to show you. Is that hard to see? Yeah. So this is our enrollment of American Indian students in the Montana University system for the last 10 years. And it goes campus by campus. And I think this is important to look at it by campus. So if you go down here to the corner, and this is fall of 2011. We don't have the numbers from this fall yet. We had self-identified 2,304 American Indian students enrolled in our campuses. Every semester, we have about 47,000 students in the Montana University system. So that comes down to about 4.8%. So does anyone know what the state population American Indian percentage is for Montana? Willie, what'd you say? Close. 6.4 or 5, I think. So we're below where we should be. That does only include self-identified, and it does also include out-of-state folks. So if we have people from different states who identify, that skews that number. It doesn't include our tribal college partners, and we met, Regent Robinson and I met earlier today with tribal college presidents, and if that number were to include the tribal colleges of Montana, you'd see it go up to about 11 or 12%. So that's very important. But we look at these my office looks at this. We look at this and say, what campuses are doing well? Where are students going? What kind of majors do they take? How are they doing? And then the next slide, which is probably even harder to read, is the retention rate. So in higher ed, we like to measure retention, and essentially the way we do it is we look at fall-to-fall retention. So so this number measures in the fall of 2010, we do a cohort, first-time students that return the next fall at the same institution. So if someone transferred, they fall off of this data sheet. We catch them on another one, but they fall off of here. So what we see is that for American Indian students, we have at our two-year colleges about a 30.9% retention rate. And in a four-year, we have about a 63% retention rate. If you compare that to the overall, for a two-year, it's about 54%, and four-year, it's at 75% for all of our campuses. So we don't do as good of a job as we should. So we use this data in higher ed to look at what is it that we need to do better. And those are things that we have advisory councils, we have, conferences and research and meetings, and we talk to students and folks to try to get a sense of what is it that we can do better. Because ultimately what we want is to honor the fact that we have a diverse set of knowledge in our state, and we have diverse communities that have different types of needs, and we want to make sure that we are a university system for all people in Montana, and not just the select few who can afford it or who know how to maneuver the system. So that's that data. If anyone's interested in it, I have so much data, you could do your dissertation on it. Just email me at the Commissioner's office, and I'd be glad to send it to you. And that's that. I kept it short because I thought it would be good. And then if you have, because short is always good. But if you have any questions, there's a lot of folks here that could probably answer, and we do have some microphones for you.
Question, if you raise your hand, we'll bring the microphones, because we are podcasting and recording this session. So if you have a question, I can start out. I have a question because I know the 6.5 overall population is American Indian, but in our K-12 system, we have closer to 12%, 11.8%. So should we be looking at those numbers and why those students aren't coming into our colleges?
Yes, we should be. I would say that, and if there's people here from the K-12 system or College of Ed, probably can speak to this more, but we do try, data's data, and we try to look at it in a lot of different ways. It is true that in the state of Montana, we see a decrease in the overall number of students graduating from high school. That cohort is going down, except for when it comes to our American Indian population. That number is going up. And so it becomes more and more important as the ratio changes that we make sure we're identifying and addressing the needs of diversity and of different types of communities, whether it's rural or low socioeconomic status, in our teacher ed programs, our college programs, but also our programs that we run through higher ed that reach down into the K-12 system. As far as the K-12 expertise, that's not my area. I couldn't speak too much to that, but you probably could.
New buildings, where are these cuts coming from? Are they coming, what departments are they coming out of,
Not much. And with this being said, that every campus of the university system is its own campus. And you have a president and provost and people in place that govern that. Now, the regions and the commissioner's office absolutely review budgets, approve curriculum, look at academic programs, look at programming that are student service related. But to get down into the little tiny details, very difficult for our regents to do that. That doesn't mean that those things sometimes don't come to us and we review them more carefully. I guess I'm not answering your question. I'm looking at your...
What facilities, how much staff do you have to support that?
I see what you're saying. So the data, monitoring the data is step one. As I said, data can tell you whatever you want it to tell you. And so what the important part now is to start telling the story behind the data. So we look at campuses that are struggling with retention or graduating our students, or we look at low performance in certain types of classes, and then we try to drill down to what's happening. We typically do that with the campuses because, again, we don't rule the campuses by any means. And if there are concerns that come up, I talk a lot to people, even on this campus, that have concerns about things that are happening. And we try to make sure that we're advocating for the mission of this office. There are other people that work in the commissioner's office that advocate for other things, and that's fine. But my job is to advocate for this. So, we do it knowing that there's a whole big pie of the university system that may not always turn into what we want it to be or what we like it to be. Did you have something major?
I'll go ahead and speak to a portion of that. I think yours is the question that relates to globally, what do we do as the regions, looking at the overall system as it relates to the faculty, staff, and the students, each of the campuses, and how do we manage that? How we manage it is really using the commissioner's office and their staff as effectively as we can. We're fortunate in our state that we have what's called the Board of Regents really has an independence or interdependence, I should say, with our governors, the executive branch, as well as the legislative branch. So the legislative branch we work with as we are getting ready to, in this next legislative session, to establish that budget. But part of that goes on a year and a half before that, when we start putting our budget together, is working with the governor's office so that the governor's budget that's proposed to the legislature really represents what our needs are, both facility-wise and staff-wise. So we're right in the middle of that process right now in preparing for this next legislative session. So, globally, that's how we participate. In addition to that, on the Board of Regents, we have our own committees as well. We each chair our own committees that deal with certain aspects of the overall system. We utilize, I do want to mention, we utilize each of those campus leaders, the presidents and the chancellors, the deans of each of those institutions, to help us really gain the knowledge of what it needs to operate that particular institution. So that there's a system that we have as regents, I feel very fortunate, that is really connected in a very tight way. We don't get things perfect, but with the amount of effort that we put into it, I think it's a system that, in comparison to other states, I think we work in an effective manner. So I don't know if that answers your questions about how we start to put together a comprehensive approach to looking at what the needs are of the system.
Martian, thank you.
Can you give me an idea of the relationship between you and the Indian Education for All? I think out of OPI, the folks that are generating all of the materials. How are they connected with you?
So the Indian Education Division at the Office of Public Instruction is K-12, and we're higher ed. So we're two different arms of public education, and so we have a collegial relationship. We work together. We're not connected legally or in any other way, except for we understand we're doing the same thing, and we're educating the people of Montana. So I work with the folks at Indian Education Division on consultation of materials or programs. We trade best practices. We try to include each other on conversations to make sure that what they're doing in the professional development and the information they're giving is being shared throughout the university system and on all our campuses. So here in Bozeman, Jioanna has a great relationship with those folks, and so you can be sure that your College of Education here is in the know. But we need to make sure all the other campuses do too.
That's the reason I wanted to say something, because I've been teaching, I don't want to tell you how long. I've been teaching a long time. And when I went through here in the English department, when I got any materials that were viable and exciting, I kept them and used them in my classroom when I got my jobs. So the reason I'm saying it is that Dottie Susad just came out with an incredible poetry book that's to die for. And I just was hoping that for example, the English students here were going to get a chance, even if they have to purchase it when they buy their books at the beginning, because honest to Pete, those things will be so usable. And I really believe that that's a way to get people excited about bringing really viable materials into their classrooms. So I was just sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, people need to get their hands on that material. And what they're doing is so exciting and so high quality. I just wanted you to hear that from a classroom teacher.
Thank you very much. I'm sure they'd be happy to hear that.
I tell them.
They were passing it out at the MEA MFT Entertainment Conference in Village last week. There is a PDF, so all of you that would like to see it, it's called Birthright Born to Poetry. Joe McGeeshick, Little Bear, Mandy Stoker-Broadus, everybody has their poetry in there, and Dottie Susad did write very incredible lesson plans to go along with them.
I especially encourage any English teachers that are, or people who are aiming to do that, to look it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Of course, the next one's going to be over there. There's a question here. Maybe you can you speak loud enough? Do you think that she's coming? But There's one down here. Any? Sorry.
Hi. I don't know if this is maybe for the university, maybe it's a question for you, but is there a way that students can report any issues that they're having, like a professor isn't being culturally responsive or whatever? Is there a grievance process, or are there resources available to instructors so that they can make sure to, get on board with this? Because I've been an instructor here for a year now, and it's really been my own effort in learning really anything about this. So maybe there are resources out there, but I don't.
Sure.
I don't know what they are.
That's what you teach.
Sociology. Yeah.
So, a couple parts to your questions. One is if you witness something that is upsetting to you, you have on this campus a whole set of procedures of where to report that. Whether it's you as a faculty member to your department chair, and I'm certain that you have it, and if you don't know, I know that your student services people can help you find it. So before you go calling the Commissioner of Higher Education, the best thing for you to do is to find out, what the resources are there. We can step in and help if it gets to that level, if there's a problem. As far as just looking for information and how to infuse, again, ideally you would go to your department chair or the dean of your school and say, I'm interested in this, how do I infuse it? A lot of it comes from faculty interest and their own expertise in research. And I can connect you to some resources, whether it's through your Native American Studies program here or other resources that we know. And so, unfortunately, you do kind of have to hunt for it a little bit. There's not is there a teaching and learning center here?
Scott Sander is our new director of American Indian Student Success Services here on campus. He's doing a terrific job reaching out, the NAS department, ourselves. We're always willing to talk to you, help you figure out where the services is and how to help students. So Scott is doing a terrific job. He's down in Wilson 1, and we're here to support American Indian students. So any way that we can do that, or anything you need to know that'll help you to work better with those students, we're happy to share.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Did you have a question down here?
My question relates to students being able to go to college, since we're dealing with the higher ed, need a lot of support systems. Well, I happen to be one of those individuals that works in the financial aid office, and we all know what's happening federally. But the question that I have is, well, first of all, we have some particular limitations given the fact that we have to deal with federal regulations. But I guess what I was wondering is, what do we need to do as these support offices, and what are you doing to help these support offices? And do you work with state and regional organizations, like we have the Montana Association of Financial Administrators and the regional and national levels, and wondering what is done so that we are providing the maximum service, and we're doing our best in that role of retention.
Well, we do work with MAFSA and some of the other different state organizations. We recently presented at the Montana College Access Network, which was a lot of our financial aid folks, and we talked about identifying resources, or even just how do you have those conversations with people. So if you're connected to your professional organization, there are resources. We have folks that can come and talk to you either as a group, or if you have a situation in your financial aid office and you can't find the resolution or a good idea generation here on campus, then I do get calls every day in my office from people on campuses that just want to make sure they don't sound crazy before they go and talk to their colleagues about something. And so you can call me and we can talk it out and see what's happening. It's really difficult when you have an office that spans every single function of a university that is, as everyone, is understaffed and overworked. So it's really difficult. We have to prioritize. And financial aid is a huge access issue, but it's not the only access issue. And so connecting to the College Access Network and the Aspire and TRIO program, I think is probably the most bang for your buck But calling and asking me a question, if I don't know, I mean, I can point you to lots of resources. Yeah.
Well, being from Oklahoma, I'd like to commend Montana for their extraordinary work in Indian education. Oklahoma is very far behind Montana in that respect. However, Dr. Mann is working tirelessly with the Department of Education and our host university to implement some courses in the field of education. But last summer, we had the opportunity to exchange some language regarding also Indian education courses for healthcare professionals that are extremely lacking with knowledge. And so I was wondering where Montana was at with anything of that nature.
Well, I know I have an expert in the audience on this, but I wouldn't say that Montana is exactly where it needs to be, but we do recognize that there is a special need for information for healthcare professionals. And that's actually how I got started in higher ed, was I worked for the University of Washington School of Medicine and then moved to Missoula for the School of Pharmacy. And Willina Oldperson is in here. Hi, Willie. She is the coordinator of the Native American Center of Excellence at the School of Pharmacy that works with pharmacists in training as well as other allied health professionals to make sure they understand about the history, about health disparities and where that comes from. And it's not just patient behavior. And it's really important to understand that there's, as Dr. Mann was saying, that there's a historical reason some of these diseases are more prevalent, but also in being culturally competent when they're dealing with their patients. And so I know at least in Montana, both in the WAMI program, the School of Medicine here, and in Missoula, that cultural competence is really important, and that we not only try to recruit American Indians into the health field because we believe that that is one of the best ways to increase and improve the health of our American Indian populations, but we also make sure our non-Indian health care professionals have training so that they can be appropriate. They can talk about traditional medicine. They can, as far as being able to ask the question, they don't feel uncomfortable when they're dealing with patients from a traditional background. So, we have some of those. I know Oklahoma State, I think, has a Center of Excellence, too, at their School of Medicine. I could be making this up, but I think so. At least at some point did. And so they might have some resources there for you that are specific to your region. I think we ran out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello again, everybody. We have our last session. If you'll take your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. I've asked Dr. Wayne Stein to lead us in a discussion on tribal colleges. We're really grateful that he's agreed to do this for us. We have Dr. Henrietta Mann again and Dr. Dick Littlebear, and they'll tell you all about their work and their current positions as tribal college presidents. But Dr. Wayne Stein is a professor here of Native American Studies and Higher Education Studies at MSU. He's worked closely with the 7 tribal colleges, the TCUs, of Montana and several others around the country. He's also consulted with several tribes interested in starting their own TCUs. His teaching responsibilities in the College of Letters and Science here at MSU focus on undergraduate Native American Studies and Literature and Contemporary Issues of American Indians, while his focus in the NAS Master's Graduate Studies program are on TCUs, Minorities in Higher Education and Contemporary Issues of American Indians. His area of scholarship and publishing has focused primarily on the tribal colleges, but he has done some research and writing in the areas of Indian gaming and faculty of color in higher education. Dr. Stein has formerly served as president of Sitting Bull College and vice president of academic affairs at Fort Berthold Community College. Dr. Stein's tribal affiliation is Turtle Mountain Chippewa, and among his many publications, he has several books focusing on higher education and tribal colleges, the renaissance of American higher education capturing the dream, American Indians and Alaska Natives in post-secondary education, and tribally controlled colleges making good medicine. So welcome, Dr. Stein.
Bonjour. You guys are the survivors. And I was just talking to Dick and Henry and saying, we better make it quick. It's almost 4 o'clock, time for people to go home. So I'll try to be quick, but I'm really honored to be up here with Henry and Dick, both of who are considered some of our more important elders among not only American Indians in general in this country, but more specifically in American Indian education. I'd like to just say a couple of things about each of them because of who they are and what they mean to me and what they mean to American Indian people in this country. I'd like to start with Henrietta Mann. One of my proudest moments at Montana State University is that I'm the guy that stole her from the University of Montana. And it was kind of serendipitous. I won't go into the long story, but it really worked out well for us at Montana State University. Henry came to us, and I think I can say this in all honesty, when she was becoming a little disillusioned with the Montana University system. After, I think it was 25 years at the University of Montana. And we got her here, and she brought an energy and a joy to the American Indian people here at Montana State University. And I'm telling you the truth when I tell you, within 2 weeks, she had Montana State University's administration eating out of her hand. And it's been good for us ever since at the Department of Native American Studies. We're still feeding off the residue of that goodwill that she generated almost immediately. She even had the president and our dean calling her Auntie Henry. That tells you what I'm talking about. So I'm really proud of that. But Henry has been an inspirational leader for many, many, many years for American Indian people and for educators, not just American Indian educators, but educators, living her life and demonstrating with her life and teachings what a difference a single person can make, and being full of joy when they're doing it, and only preaching at us once in a while to get us to listen. But that's what aunties are supposed to do, right? Okay. I met Henry in 1973 when I was a student. And I know Henry doesn't remember this when I met her. I was an Indian student activist, if I can put it that way. And during a time when things were, kind of lively for American Indians in the West here. And I went to a meeting in Helena, Montana, and Henry was the first American Indian educator I ever got to listen to that really made sense to me. And so I made it a point to go up and talk to her. And she has some influence on the trajectory of my life ever since that talk. And I've told her about that story, and she doesn't remember me. But she remembers, hundreds of Indian students. But my point is this, guys. My point is this. Henry did something for me that she's done for thousands of American Indians and non-Indian students. And and she reminds me of one of my other heroes, something I've tried to live by, the great Freckles Brown. How many of you people have ever heard of Freckles Brown? Freckles Brown was a great bull rider. He won the world championship in the 60s when he was 43 years old. And I got to watch him ride in Wolf Point, Montana when I was a boy, a young man. But Freckles Brown always said this, and Henry lives this. It takes just as much energy to make someone feel good as it does to make them feel bad. So why wouldn't you want to make someone feel good? And Henry reminds me of that, like I was sitting here listening to her today, and she reminded me of that. And so I thank Henry for that. All right, Dick. I have less to say about Dick. No, I'm just kidding. No, Dick's one of those, we should be really proud of Dr. Richard Littlebear. He is an MSU graduate, and he is one of the 3 or 4 preeminent native linguists in this country. And he has been at the forefront of helping save his language, the Northern Cheyenne language. He's also been a role model for many young Indian people who are trying to save American Indian languages. And it's kind of interesting and ironic that it's my generation and Dick's generation. We are the Indian people who have most lost our language. We are the end result of 5 or 6 generations of forced assimilation and language suppression, and it worked. And it's people like Dick, the few of my generation, who managed to hang on to their language and managed to maintain that passion for it, who are actually the inspirations for our children, my children, who are now the ones bringing back our languages. And it's because of Dick Littlebear that a lot of that's happened in this country. And just to tell you how important this is, I was sitting and listening to one of my granddaughters. And she at the time was about 9 years old. And she was attending an immersion school up on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. And she was, the immersion school is the Ani language or the White Clay or the Grovant people. And she was sitting there and she was teaching that language. Get this. She was teaching that language to her grandmother and her great-grandmother because they had been part of those generations that had been forced away from their own language. And it's because of Dick Littlebear that, in part, in Montana, that a lot of that is happening. So I'm really proud to call him my colleague, my friend, and an inspiration in Indian education. So I want to give both of these folks a wonderful hand. Now, after saying all of that, in their spare time, they work in tribal colleges as presidents. That says something right there about the quality of these two people. But I want to talk a little bit about tribal colleges just for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to our active participants in tribal colleges. The first thing I want to say is that we in Montana are really, really fortunate because we have 7 tribal colleges. Montana, the state of Montana has more tribal colleges than any other state in the Union. That's something to be, for American Indians to be in Montana to be really proud of. Now, having said that, I want to also remind you that the Montana University system in the state of Montana maybe ought not to be so proud of that fact directly. We have 7 tribal colleges in the state of Montana for one simple reason. Anybody want to guess what it is? We have, what? No. If we left it to the law, we'd have none even yet. No, I'm just kidding you. No, we have 7 tribal colleges in the state of Montana because there was a huge vacuum. The Montana university system failed its Montana Indian citizens in higher education. If they would have been doing their job, I'm a part of that, we would have been doing our job, there would be not a single tribal college in this state. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, okay. However, having said all of that now, Montana is one of the Montana university system, and in particular certain individuals in that system. And the one that comes to mind that may be the one who did the most for the 7 tribal colleges in the state of Montana as a Montana university system person was a man by the name of Bill Teets, former president of Montana State University. Bill Teets, when he gave his acceptance speech as president of Montana State University, I want to say in 1977. Is that right? Is there any old timers in here that remember that? About 1977. He was the first official university person of any weight to ever utter the words American Indian in a speech. It took until 1977. But he came on like gangbusters. He set the stage and challenged his fellow university people to do something for their American Indian citizens in this state. And he never stopped. We still live with the legacy of Bill Teets today. Arrow, he started in like 1979. It's still with us here at Montana State University. He was the one who put the resources into the Department of Native American Studies. And he was its protector for many years when other departments on this campus wanted to eliminate it. Every time there was a shortage of money or a retrenchment, the first thing that they said was, who needs NAS? Let's take their money and divide it up. And it was Bill Teets that stopped that. And he challenged the University of Montana. He challenged Eastern Montana College, MSU Billings now, and Northern, and said, what are we going to do? And he led that group, and he assisted the tribal colleges directly. So we have a history in this state between tribal colleges and the Montana University system. And it's a good history, something we can be really proud of as Montanans and people who work for this university system and work in tribal colleges. And that cooperation is stronger today than it's ever been before. And Jioanna is one of those people that makes it that way. Every day she works on that. And other universities and colleges in this state have like-minded people. And we can trace it almost all back to Bill Teets, the beginning. By the way, before I turn it over to Henry, Bill Teets is the only non-Indian in the history of the state of Montana where all seven reservation tribal leaders and all 7 tribal colleges came together and gave him a retirement party. He is the only non-Indian they've ever done that for. I don't even think they've ever done it for an Indian. So that tells you that we have a history now that's 25 years old. And in my mind, with people like Jioanna and Dick, it's only going to get stronger and better. With that, thank you, and I'm going to ask Henry to come up here and talk to us a few minutes about what she's trying to do as a president of a new tribal college, some of the challenges she faces, and some of the maybe successes she's had. Dr. Mann? Oh, you can stay there, yeah.
It takes two microphones for you to hear me. I must have a very small voice.
We just don't want to miss him.
Okay, Wayne J. That's my nephew. That's the one that brought me over the Continental Divide to another experience. And I technically have retired from Montana State University. I did so in the year 2000. And I think my retirement actually away from the job lasted one afternoon. I retired on June 30th, and July 1st I started working for, and I may have been against the law, but working for Jeff Gamble as president, who was then the president of Montana State, as his special assistant. And at that time, there were maybe 4 special assistants to a president of a major institution in the whole country. Well, at that particular time, there were 2 of us, the other person being Peterson Zah at Arizona State University. There are now about 5, a handful, not many Indians that advise presidents. And Dr. Carjuzaa kept me on. But before Dr. Carjuzaa came here, there was suddenly this flurry of activity from the south, on the south wind. We want you to build our tribal college. And I had served on their education authority, appointed by the tribes, because tribal colleges have to be, in this case, chartered or established by their tribal governing bodies. Iris had started in 2003 by passing a resolution at one of our tribal council meetings, and the people said, you will establish a tribal college. And so planning went into effect. They created an educational authority. I was put on the education authority to look at higher education of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes and their young people. Somewhere or another, we got very focused because of our director of our tribal Department of Education saying, you really need to build a tribal college. This is where it all started, 2003. And so we did. And we focused as an authority on incorporating as a nonprofit organization. In the meantime, sometimes I wonder about the wiseness, or maybe even in this case the duplicity or something. I didn't know. I served as the interim president for about a year, and I was working here. It didn't work. You can't build a tribal college from a distance. And Gail was on site already. And so one day we were sitting in our board meeting, and our chair says, is there anyone that doesn't want to be an officer? And so I held up my hand. I didn't want to be an officer. Enough of that. And it says, oh, Henry doesn't want to be an officer. Okay, she won't be an officer. And I thought, gee, that went over very smoothly. And then at the end of the meeting, I discovered why, because they had decided that I was going to be their interim president. No wonder I didn't become an officer, huh? I really should have become an officer in hindsight. I should have stayed there. And so I said, and next thing I know, there was a press release in our tribal newspaper that I had been appointed the president and didn't even know about it. My daughter in Las Vegas got our tribal newspaper, and she called and said, what are you doing being the president of a tribal college? And I said, I'm not. She said, well, according to our paper, you are. Well, I'm an interim president. Are you going to have to move to Oklahoma? Because I had left Oklahoma in 1970 and really wandered far afield. left Oklahoma to go to the University of California, Berkeley to teach in one of the first Native American Studies program in the country, in the entire country. And I had come to the University of Montana in 1972 to build the program here. And I had made a promise to myself and to my late husband that I would never go back to Oklahoma. Tribal politics can be brutal. Tribal politics even plays into the kind of course content that is incorporated into our courses. So I left. And so I wasn't very easily going to return to Oklahoma, even on an interim basis. Besides, I was enjoying working here at Montana State University as an endowed chair. It was wonderful. And then being the special assistant to a president, somewhere or another, reason kicked in, and you said, you can't build a tribal college from a distance. Several states separated where I was supposed to be. And I said, I went to the board, and by that time they had transformed into a board of regents, that I can't do this, you need to find a president. And they said, you can't do what? I said, I can't govern from a distance. And they said, so we have a president. She said, it's you, but you're going to have to move down here. It was almost as if, and when I left, I remember the conversation over in Montana Hall. Well, okay, you're off doing God's work. That's exactly what they said. There was a call. I don't know that it was exactly God, but it was next to God to convince me to go back there. And so I said, all right. I'll do so for 1 year. That was in 2008. Do your math. 1 year is a real long year. And so next thing I know, Gail's planning my inauguration. I remember the chair of our board looked at her and said, do you know how to plan an inauguration? And she said, no, but I can get the book from the president's office because we're located on the campus of Southwestern Oklahoma State University in Weatherford temporarily. I don't know how long temporarily is going to be either. And so the chairman looked at her and says, well, go get the book. You plan an inauguration. So I was inaugurated in 2008, this after we had acquired nonprofit status. And so that's the way it started. And as Dr. Little Bear knows, when you're at that developmental stage, you have to be supported by, at least in this case, by our tribal college. I mean, our tribes, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. That has been a continuing challenge. It is a challenge I've faced today because at first the idea of a tribal college was so important to them. And I believe it is still important in the respect, as I mentioned earlier, that it is it's their sovereign right to have their own higher education system and to determine what is to be taught to their youth and to educate for their communities. And we occupy, in terms of our jurisdiction, checkerboard fashion, 7 counties in western Oklahoma. We do not have a reservation per se. Our reservation was essentially destroyed at high noon in April of 1889 when it was open to the Indian land run. And about 50,000 people rushed in to stake their claims. leaving us very little. And so according to our new constitution and bylaws adopted in 2006, we have a territorial jurisdiction, primarily in the 7 counties of western Oklahoma. And incidentally, that land run is where we get the term boomer Sooners, those Sooners that rushed in before high noon. And so there we sit with the best intentions of the world. Sometimes the best intentions are great and wonderful, and dreams are wonderful. And I still continue to want to provide the assistance to fulfilling the dream of the Cheyenne and Arapaho to have their own institution of higher education. We have been there. We are working toward accreditation. We are working toward membership at some point in time in the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. But there are primarily 2 huge stumbling blocks that we face, and one is to demonstrate stable funding. As tribes go, you never know when the money is going to come or how much it's going to be. We submit a budget every year. We go defend our budget. We justify it. We go at mid-year to justify again. And so we operate on funding and never knowing how long it's going to be until the next appropriation comes through. But knowing that, we nonetheless have established our presence on campus. We offer about a dozen classes a semester. Our courses are taught primarily by adjunct faculty. We have 4 degree programs, associate in science degree programs, one in tribal administration, another in American Indian Studies, another in general studies, and the last one, children's teachers. And we got our Cheyenne and Arapaho name for ourselves in them. And we really, really feel that we can do the most with that degree. And it started out actually helping our Head Start programs meet the federal regulations that required associate degrees and baccalaureate degrees. So we have those 4 programs. I think we're doing good work. Our enrollment peaked at 110. It has decreased because of federal financial aid requirements, because of the usual and kinds of reasons for our students having to drop out, as is true for the composition of tribal colleges and universities. We have primarily non-traditional students. It's primarily they commute, and you would not think it would be a problem, but there's transportation problems. For example, I have this young man who takes my college success course. College success. And I want him to succeed. And it's just every day when I see Tommy come in, he says, "Well, I got a ride. I got a ride to class." And since I was traveling yesterday, their midterm exam was given by our vice president. And apparently Tommy didn't take the exam because he couldn't get a ride to school. And I believe him, because I have seen him struggle. I've seen others like him struggle to get to and from school. financial assistance to them is very sparse. But they want to get an education, and they want to get an education that is consistent with their identity and their history and their cultures as the people, hearted alike, and the blue sky people. We have graduated in 5 graduations, 50 students with a degree in primarily American Indian Studies and in general studies. We have a student that has to complete an incomplete, they take incompletes too, it was to complete her degree in tribal administration. We've got some of the pipeline for children's teachers. We've done a lot of document preparations in terms of handbooks. We have been created by tribal resolution. We try to comply with the checklist of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and I think that we're doing very well. And so, in addition to not being able to demonstrate stable funding, although we continue to stay in existence right now, the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes have the largest land base in the state of Oklahoma. We have land. We cannot get them to give us a site. And tribal politics keeps interfering because right now our tribal government is in a stage of infighting. We have 2 governors, 2 lieutenant governors, 2 legislative bodies, 2 judicial bodies. They're all fighting with one another. Don't want to bear our dirty laundry, but I think Indian Country has done a pretty good job of advertising that situation in the newspaper. And so thinking has been, I guess, directed inward and not to the programs or to education. The Tax Commission, which is our most stable funding source, was supposed to have met yesterday. It was postponed to today. It's been postponed to tomorrow on their appropriations where we generally get money. And so I don't know when they're going to meet. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but that's the kind of relationship that we face in terms of having been created by our tribal government and having to rely upon them for funding. The dream is good. And when the people passed the resolution calling for the establishment of a tribal college, they were not, and I was still here, I was up here, they did not realize that it's a lifelong commitment, that it takes a great deal of investment in the future education of their children. Now that is what keeps me there primarily. The college for the children, to make sure that there are courses there that are going to strengthen their identity, where they can study in a safe environment, which is what tribal colleges do, where they can learn about who they are, that they, the only places in this entire world where they can really study, in this case, about Cheyenne and Arapaho peoples, 2 separate tribes. It is a joy. It's a joy when I see them walk across our little stage to graduate. It's a joy to see them come into class when they're there. I love teaching. And probably Wayne can say that, yeah, I'll admit it. I'm much more productive in the classroom than I feel sometimes as an administrator. I thought that I had left that, but I find myself in the thick of it. The Cheyenne Arapaho Tribal College is my encore career, the biggest career and challenge of my lifetime. but it has my undivided attention, except for when I think of you and want to come back to the home of my heart, the state of Montana and Montana State University. So I'm there doing the work of creator, of grandfather, grandmother, and hope that it will materialize when we too have our young people, like Wayne's granddaughter, speaking her language and teaching others, as that is critical to our ongoing identity as not just Cheyennes or Arapahoes, but as indigenous peoples. So tribal colleges are important, and I think that we too deserve one. And so that is what I am doing as my encore career. Maybe doing that for a long time, or maybe it will be a short time. And maybe I'll be back by next fall. Or maybe they'll keep me there a little bit longer. I don't know. I guess somewhere or another I just said, okay, just use me. So.
Thank you, Henry, so much for that information. I know it was hard for you to tell us some of those things. With that, I'm going to ask Dr. Littlebear to give us another picture, a snapshot of a tribal college, one that has been operating, I want to say since like 1977 maybe, and has had its ups and downs, but is now a very successful tribal college under the leadership of Dr. Littlebear. So with that, Dick, go ahead.
I just got over a cold, so I hope I don't spread it to anybody else here. It'll be a good cold. I have good germs. Good Cheyenne germs. I want to tell you a little anecdote first. When I spoke to students up at the University of Great Falls. No, I get those places mixed up. Carroll College in Helena. And I was standing up at a podium, and one of the guys raised their hands and said, could you before you get started, he said, could you tell us about that sacred amulet around your neck? And I don't wear amulet. The only thing I wear is a watch. And I thought, because of advancing age and long senior moments, I put my keys around my neck. So I played along with him. I told, I have a very sacred amulet that performs magic, I said. When I go outside, I do this little ritual, I said. It starts up 250 horses, and they roam all over the countryside. I have a Honda Ridgeline pickup. That guy was sitting there and said, oh gosh, this is embarrassing. But the reason why I tell that story is that sometimes we're thought of as primarily spiritual, very spiritual people. I'm probably the least spiritual person around. And amazingly enough, I always get called to do prayers because they talk Cheyenne. And there I am giving prayers, and I said, man, I don't think she's listening to me. I'm the most sinful person here. But those are some of the stereotypes that we deal with. And I think that tribal colleges have managed to do away with a lot of them. I'm not the product of a tribal college, although I am the product of a couple of junior colleges, community colleges in the state of Montana. Had there been tribal colleges on reservations when I was embarking on the career, I think I would have advanced a lot quicker and a lot sooner than I did. And that's the kind of hope that I have for our students. I want them to be able to succeed. And sometimes tribal colleges get a bad rap because they are located on Indian reservations. In the eyes of a lot of people, it puts them down a little bit. Yet, we go through the same rigor as this university does to get accredited. Maybe even more, because we are a tribal college. And we do the same things, we offer the same courses that two-year colleges do in the state of Montana and every place else. We're a general ed college. Lately, I've been trying to get our college more oriented towards research. We're not primarily research institutions, but because we live on an Indian reservation, a prime area for research, that's why I'm promoting that. The other thing is we live on we have been studied a lot by other people. We need to study ourselves and come to our own conclusion, which will probably be more valid. I see that I do a lot of work in Native American languages, as Wayne has said. And I'm not a linguist. I'm a self-taught Cheyenne linguist. I've studied my language. I've studied second language acquisition. I just don't rely on fluency. I'm very fluent in both English and Cheyenne. But I don't just rely on fluency. I want a base for why we have our languages and what they mean to us. When somebody asked me one time, how come you keep advocating Native American languages when they have no use commercially, financially, academically, sociologically? I said, you're asking the wrong questions. It has to do with Native American Cheyenne identity. That's what it means. That's what it means. And a lot of our educators, even Native American educators, overlook that. They buy into this other idea that English is the only way. And that's why I came back. I used to work up in Alaska. I came back to the reservation because well, let me tell you another story. When I first left the reservation, I was 14 years old. I'd been asked to go live with some people who were under the mistaken impression that I was smart. I fooled the heck out of them there. But when I left the reservation, I was raised by my grandmother. And by the time I was 14 years old, people had asked me, and in the spirit of adventure, I thought, well, I can always hitchhike back wherever I'm at. So I left the reservation and came back, and after the second year, after I had gone off for a sophomore year in high school, my grandmother said, it looks like you're going to be doing this. You're going to be going to school off the reservation and living off the reservation. She said, and you're getting to the age where you're going to be interested in the opposite sex. Very perceptive of her. 15 years of age. And she said, first of all, you can be interested in anybody you want, but come back and marry a Cheyenne woman. And I thought, well, later on I kind of thought, well, that was very racist, I thought. And then the second thing she said, if you're going to be off the reservation and you're going to be working and doing all that, one of these days you're going to get called back to come home. I was 15 or 16 years old and said, what does Grandma know? She doesn't know. Well, of course I did come back and marry a Cheyenne woman. Fulfilled that part. And in fact, I married 2 of them. And could have probably kept on going. No, I'm just kidding. I embarrassed myself.
I should be laughing.
Anyhow, so there I was. That was one part that was fulfilled. And then I was living up in Alaska, and I got a phone call from Dr. Alonso Spain. And he said, would you apply for a job down here? We got an opening down here. And I said, I got a good job up here. I don't. Then I remember what my grandmother said. And that tipped everything over, and I said, yeah, I'll do that. And not being assured that I was going to come back. Well, I came back. Here the job was to be the Dean of Cultural Affairs. And because it fell right in line with my interest in Cheyenne and all languages actually, I decided, yeah, this is a good way to revive the language, to perpetuate it. And then when I did come back, I was the Dean of Cultural Affairs for 3 years. And Dr. Spain decided to retire, which he did. And the job was open. I wasn't interested in it. And he finally, it was advertised. Nobody applied for it. Then they re-advertised it again. Still nobody applied for it. And then people started asking me, why don't you apply for it? And I kept wondering, why should I apply for a job that nobody wants? And so I decided, well, this might be a good forum to promote Cheyenne language. And that was always kind of a driving force. So I did apply. And lo and behold, I got it. I almost asked for a recount. But it has been a really good job. I remember when I was going to high school, cleaning out chicken coops as part of my, to earn money, and having to burn my clothes afterwards because they were so full of chicken fleas. So ever since then, everything has been a progression upwards. And this is the best job that I've ever had. Although there were some pauses when I first came back, because I wasn't working with a board up there in Alaska. I was the main decider of everything. I hired, fired, executed, hanged personnel. And I ended up, that was one of the things that gave me pause. Will I be able to work with the board? well, I decided I could probably do it, and I've been able to do that really well. Because the boards that I have worked with have been very, very education oriented, and they don't get paid for it. They get a stipend for babysitting, for their babysitters, stuff like that, and it isn't very much. But just by doing that, they're showing their dedication. They think everything through, and the really distinguishing part about our board is that all 6 of them speak Cheyenne, including me. I'm not a board member, but as the president, we all speak Cheyenne. So in that sense, we could talk Cheyenne all the way through the session. We could hold an executive session with all of you still in there. We could talk Cheyenne and you wouldn't know what was going on in there. And that might be broken apart because we're having the board elections November 6th. So that might break apart. But that's been kind of unique ever since I've been there. We offer the same courses that everybody else does. And I think, and most of our students, I think, come over here to Montana State University, not because I'm a graduate for them, because this is a quality school. And I don't mean to say it because these 2 gentlemen are sitting here. I'm saying it in spite of them. No, I'm just kidding.
I have a story. I want to tell
you notice I haven't said anything about him. I'm just bubbling over with stories about him.
You just made a mistake.
But I think that is that being a president of the college is a very good experience. It has its ups and downs, especially when you have to go through a personnel action with a close relative. And on the Cheyenne Reservation, I'm close relatives with everybody. And this notion of nepotism, this notion of having a degree of separation from everybody just does not exist. And so when you're, I'm the one who takes care of all the personnel actions at the college, because I don't want the vice president doing it, and the board does not want to do that. So I take care of all of them. It is very uncomfortable. Those are probably the most uncomfortable situations that I've been in. Other than that, it's good to see, as Dr. Mann has said, the students walking across every May, going through there. Since I've been there, and I've been there for 17 years now, going on 17 years, we have had about 400 students graduate. And mostly students who would never have a college experience if we were not there. Often the numbers are not terrific. I think we have peaked at about 220. Those numbers, you probably have classes that big in your freshman class here. But most of the students there would not ever have graduated were we not there. And it was, we did a survey just the other day, about a month ago, trying to determine what the main needs were of the students, because we're providing iPads at the library and wherever we can check them out. One of the things, so we did the survey of what students needed, and we thought it would be connectivity to the internet, or the lack of cell phone service, we thought that would be the need. The main need was transportation to the college. They wanted access to the college because we serve the immediate area is about maybe 30 miles in diameter, the radius of 30 miles, and so, and even though we do have a bus service, it doesn't, for some reason, it doesn't jive with our class schedules because some of the students work part-time or full-time, and then they have family obligations. Some of the stories would bring tears to your eyes, just the way they sacrificed just to come to school. The hunger for knowledge. During the time that I've been there, our students were at least 29 years of age. Now they're around 22 years of age. And that means that a lot of our students are now coming straight out of college, straight out of high school into the college. And that makes for different needs again, because the students want gymnasiums, they want all the things that they had in high school, and we are unable to provide them. They want basketball teams, they want volleyball teams. We are unable to provide them because we operate on a very thin margin. One of the accreditation questions is, how much of a reserve do you have? Money. How much money do you have in reserve? Our answer is, we ain't got none. Because that's how we operate. We only spend what we get. And our college runs on anywhere from 60 to 80% on grants. So we're always writing grants. And if you ever want to work at a tribal college, become a good grant writer. Go for grant writing. In fact, one of the best educations I've had is when I learned how to write grants. The doctorate, kind of good, but learning how to write grants. And I did this even before I was in a doctoral program. How many of you have ever visited a tribal college? Good. Why am I talking to you then? If you have any questions, I guess I'm done. Thank you.
While you're thinking of questions, I want to tell you a story about Dick. Talk a little bit. About 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, he and I went on a trip to New Zealand with about 20 of our closest friends in the tribal college movement to visit the Maoris who were starting their Jioanna, their tribal colleges. And so we were going to have a little culture exchange there. They're our good buddies, those Maori folks. And we got there that first day. We landed in Auckland, and then we bussed down, I guess, to Hamilton, right? Is it that way? Yeah.
I'm not going to help you with this
whatever.
story.
We headed out. So we said, we're going to take you to one of their lodges. What did they call them? Marae. And they're going to be waiting for you to welcome you. So we were all excited. So we had a drum, and we had 4 singers, and we decided that we would formally greet them by having our 4 drummers carry our drum and sing an honor song as we walked into their place, their space, and then the marae. And so we were going to do that, and then there would be the men and the women. And so, but they said, among the Maoris, your most respected person, elder, must carry a gift and be out front. And as the Maoris come to you, you set it down and then you back off so that they can see that you're not hostile. We all looked at each other, and we all ended up looking at Dick. We said, well, Dick is our most revered elder. So he's going to be in front of the drum. I can't remember if we gave him a cash gift or something. It was in an envelope. So Dick was carrying it real solemn, you know. The drum was going, and the men were marching, and the women were behind the men. And we started walking into that open space before the marae. And the women were watching us on the side over here in traditional dress, and the elders. And all of a sudden, the young men come busting out, doing the haka. Have you guys ever seen a Maori haka that looks dead serious? That's what we were looking. These guys were in these grass skirts, and they're tattooed up, and they were carrying war clubs, and they were going crazy. Their tongues were wagging. You know, and they were just really going. And we were all watching this kind of. And Dick's out there in front of us. And he walks out there. Finally, those guys stop about 10 feet from him. And Dick has to walk out there and set that thing down there. So later, he and I can't remember, one of the other guys was walking back to the bus and said something to Dick about that. He said, man, when those guys were coming at me, I thought, holy crap. What's going on here? Because these are fierce-looking dudes. And they look like they're going to kill you. You know what they're actually saying is, welcome, but if you come in peace, welcome. They're shouting at you. And they said, but if you come as hostiles, and they're going like this, their tongues are wagging, we're going to kill you and eat you. That's what they're saying in that haka. And so Dick and I said, well, Dick, how did you? He said, man, I was scared, he said, when I was watching that. But then I thought to myself, I'll be okay. I'm a Cheyenne warrior. The whole play, that was wonderful. But that's one of my stories. Okay.
Those guys were scary. There were big palm trees, and they were hiding behind them.
Yeah, I was back there, and I was a little nervous watching them, too.
I was ready to counterpunch them in case they Boy. But there was one thing he left out. There was an even bigger guy with me, Lionel Bordeaux. We both walked up there.
Oh, yeah,
I stood up there, and I had this thing in my hand, and when that guy was running around, I was suddenly standing alone by Lionel Bordeaux. Lionel Bordeaux had retreated, and he's bigger than me. I looked back.
I guess we're done, Jioanna.
Thank you all for staying, and thank you to Dr. Stein, Dr. Littlefair, Dr. Mann, Randy Foster. Thank you to Jason and Cameron and Danny for helping us. We've got Jim Vernon over there. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Because he was way back there.
Yeah. He retreated.